we go. There we go. This meeting's being recorded. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us, especially on this lovely Wednesday evening. Let's let some more people in. Okay, so my name's Nikki and I'm from Dorset Coast Forum and I will be hosting this evening's talk. This is the fourth talk in the Studland Ocean Meadows, the Science Beneath the Surface series. We're a bit earlier this evening, actually. So we've started as advertised, but it's a bit early at 5:30. So hopefully that will suit everybody on this sunny evening. So you've got the rest of your evening. We plan to be finished for 6:30. So I have a great pleasure this evening being joined by colleagues from Natural England. So we have with us Ellie James, who's the Marine Lead Advisor in the Wessex Coast Team, and Maxine Shavner, who is the Senior Marine and Coastal Officer from Natural England. We also have very online, thank you, Jessica Churchill Bissett, who's Head of Marine Conservation at the MMO, the Marine Management Organisation. So everybody be here to answer your questions this evening. But the talk tonight is actually from Ellie and Maxine, and it will be about the Studland Bay Conservation Zone and the current condition of the bay's marine environment. Oh, let's let some more people in. There we go. Sorry, I'm multitasking here. You have to forgive me. Right, so I'll start by telling you. You might have already joined us on a previous talk, but if this is the first time you've joined us, I'll tell you a little bit about the Studland Bay Marine Partnership. And so we've got the mission statement up on the screen now. So the partnership, it's really about partnership working in collaboration and to ensure the objectives of the marine conservation zone are met, that the seagrass beds can flourish while boaters and everybody who loves and uses the bay can continue to do so without impacting the environment. Okay, so here we have a map of Studland Bay. So the whole area, which is the boundary line in black, is the Studland Bay Marine Conservation Zone. The area in blue is a voluntary no anchor zone. So this is the area where the majority of the seagrass beds, as you can see in the green area, and these are actually now have that they're being managed by the partnership and now have 87 eco moorings located within the voluntary no anchor zone. So if you are a boater, if you're interested in finding more about that, I've actually put a link in the chat, and it's got information about how you can use the eco moorings and the voluntary no anchor zone. So before we move on to our presentation for this evening, just like to talk about a little bit about the Zoom meeting tonight. So we have got a presentation which will give you a better understanding of what's happening under the waves in the bay. The presentation has actually been pre-recorded, but we do have Ellie and Maxine here tonight to answer your questions. If you have any questions, oops, I've missed someone, let's let them in. If you do have any questions, you're very welcome to pop them in the chat as we go. So as you think of it, as you're watching the presentation, if you think of a question, please pop it in the chat. We can answer it in the chat if it's quick and easy. Otherwise, we'll read it out at the end and Ellie and Maxine or Jess can respond to your question then. You're very welcome if you want to ask a question. You can pop your hand up, and you can pop your hand up. You'll see at the bottom of the bar. There's in the Zoom. There's like a menu bar black at the bottom. And there's an option for reactions. You can put your hand up. You can clap. You can make smiley faces. Whatever you'd like to do in the reactions. But if you pop your hand up. At the end when we do the Q&A session, and then I'll invite you to unmute yourself and you can ask your question yourself. Your cameras are switched off and we ask you to keep them switched off, and also if you can keep yourselves unmuted while the presentation takes place. The only time we'll ask you to unmute yourself is if we invite you to ask a question. So there we go. So now I'll hand you over to Ellie and Maxine. So I just need to now change my slides to put the pre-recording on. When I do that, I'll just need to take these slides down and I'll automatically be muted. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us this evening. And I'll now hand you over to Ellie and Maxine and the presentation. Right, so bear with me one moment while I do that. Just want to make sure it happens as streamlined as possible. Let's find the sharing screen. Here we go. Okay, I might have to stop share, sorry, and then share again. There it is. Sorry, bear with me. There we go, there's that one. There it is, and I'm sharing. Thank you very much. Here's a presentation. And now I'm not sharing. Let's have one more go. Apologies. There we go.
Hello and welcome to our presentation on the Studland Bay Marine Conservation Zone condition assessment that we published this year.
Natural England is notorious for its use of acronyms, so before we start I thought it'd be useful to highlight the ones we are likely to use during the talk. Also, as a helpful note, throughout the presentation we will refer to a feature or features. A feature is simply a habitat or species which the site has been designated to protect. Just by way of providing some background, I thought it may be useful to go back to the beginning and briefly run through how and why Studland became an MCZ. Back in 2009, the Marine and Coastal Access Act became legislation, under which marine conservation zones had to be identified, designated and managed for the purpose of conserving species of marine flora and fauna, particularly if they are rare or threatened, or for conserving or protecting marine habitats or features of geological or geomorphological interest. An MCZ may also be designated for the purpose of conserving the diversity of marine flora or fauna or habitat, whether or not they are considered rare or threatened. And the designation process had to take into account economic or social consequences of that designation. So 4 regional stakeholder groups were established in 2009 around the country by the Joint Nature Conservancy Council and Natural England, and included various sea use groups tasked with recommending areas to be designated as MCZs. So Finding Sanctuary covered the southwest of England, Net Gain covered the North Sea, Balanced Seas covered the southeast of England, and the Irish Sea Conservation Zones covered the Irish Sea. In 2011, the Finding Sanctuary Group proposed 58 MCZs in the Atlantic and English Channel between the Severn Estuary and Bournemouth, of which Studland was one. Natural England then commenced the designation process with DEFRA, which was done in 3 tranches. So Tranche 1 sites were designated in 2013, Tranche 2 in 2016, and Tranche 3, including Studland Bay, were designated in 2019. Studland Bay was originally recommended by Finding Sanctuary for seagrass, subtidal sand, subtidal mixed sediments, 2 different types of intertidal sediments, short-snouted seahorse, native oyster and undulate ray, with those in bold on the slide being the features that were eventually designated, with the addition of spiny seahorse. Once the site has been designated as an MCZ, SAC or an SPA, Natural England has a statutory duty to then produce a conservation advice package within 2 years of designation, which states the conservation objectives for each site. This advice is used by our own staff members in advising on casework and condition monitoring, and externally by stakeholders for casework, including large infrastructure projects, as a guide to Natural England's view on site integrity, i.e. whether the conservation objectives are being met or hindered. This is a text-heavy slide and not necessarily to be read here and now in its entirety, But I wanted to draw your attention to the conservation objectives as stated in the designation order for the Studland Bay MCZ, showing the direct relevance for why and how we do condition assessment. It's to enable us to report on whether the conservation objectives for the MCZ and its features are being met. The conservation objectives therefore form the basis for ensuring that the MPA network remains or is restored to be ecologically coherent. The parts I've highlighted in bold are to provide context for the next slide, where I'll provide a bit more detail on the conservation advice package and the attributes within. The conservation advice package is part of the MPA cycle, represented diagrammatically here, where it constitutes a third of the cycle, which also encompasses condition assessment and monitoring. There is no specific starting point on this diagram, but as I said previously, within 2 years of an MPA being designated, Natural England need to produce a conservation advice package for that site, so we can start there. This package will clearly state all the features for which the site has been designated. It will contain the conservation objectives for that site, supplementary advice on those conservation objectives and how they can be achieved, advice on operations such as recreational activities, fishing or ports and harbour related activities, and where relevant there will be details on the seasonality of the feature, for example for fish or birds. Prior to designation, there would have been some level of baseline monitoring, either directly by us or from data gathered from elsewhere, and a vulnerability assessment undertaken to see what anthropogenic pressures those features are currently experiencing, how sensitive they are to those pressures, at what level those pressures are occurring, and what management measures may already be in place. As part of the supplementary advice on the conservation objectives, we have a number of attributes, including extent and distribution of the feature, presence and spatial distribution of biological communities, water quality and population abundance, which we write site-specific advice for and are derived directly from the conservation objectives that I showed you on the other slide and highlighted a few sections in bold. We also set a target for the feature, usually based on the baseline data and the vulnerability assessment of either maintain or recover. That can also be known as reduce or restore. In order to meet the conservation objectives and have the features of the site in favourable condition. The attributes are divided into principal and secondary attributes. The principal attributes are physical descriptors which directly inform on the condition of the feature. If one principal attribute fails in the condition assessment, then the feature will be deemed in unfavourable condition. The secondary attributes mainly describe vital functions and processes which support the feature. So for species, this usually incorporates the supporting habitats. If two secondary attributes fail to meet their target, then the feature is also deemed to be in unfavourable condition. Why do Natural England carry out condition assessments? For MCZs, we have an obligation under Section 124 of the Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009 to report on the extent to which the authority, Natural England, believe that the conservation objectives for each MCZ have been achieved, and also under the OSPAR Convention for the Protection of the Marine Environment in the North East Atlantic. The reasons for carrying out these assessments on the features of designated sites such as MCZs is to ensure the ecological coherence of the MPA network through assessing whether individual features such as seagrass, reef, merle are meeting the conservation objectives that have been set. And if they are not meeting the target, why? For example, the conservation objectives for seagrass are to maintain in favourable condition if they are already in favourable condition, or to be brought into favourable condition if they are not already in favourable condition. For each protected feature, favourable condition means that within the MCZ, the extent is stable or increasing, its structure and functions, its quality, and the composition and characteristic biological communities, including diversity and abundance of species forming part or inhabiting habitat, are sufficient to ensure that its condition remains healthy and does not deteriorate. So again, this is related directly back to the slide that had the conservation objectives outlined on them. The condition assessment also helps inform future monitoring needs. Whilst Natural England have funding constraints, meaning that we can only monitor a small proportion of the MPA features, we work with partners and academic institutions to help deliver the evidence base required. This is a brief overview of how we carry out our condition assessments. Ellie will provide more detail as she takes us through the assessment she's done for Studland Bay MCZ. So depending on the site and the features, there are 2 or 3 levels within the condition assessment process. So level 1 is the attribute assessment. Level 2 would be an assessment of the sub-features or the supporting habitats, but that's not relevant for this assessment. And level 3, the feature-wide assessment. So the second step is only really applied to SACs and SPAs. This structure is reflected in the setup of the marine condition assessment pages on the designated sites view. So Ellie will kind of briefly take us through that in the next few slides. The first step of the assessment process is to gather and evaluate a range of evidence sources. These are used to decide whether the attributes of a particular feature have passed or failed against the targets that were set out in the conservation advice for the site. Details on the evidence used, baseline data, monitoring data gathered post-baseline, and any other evidence that is relevant but not specifically either of the previous 2, either post-baseline or baseline monitoring. Using the results of the attribute assessments, this information is then aggregated for the next level, feature-wide assessment. So step 2 in the condition assessment process is the feature-wide assessment. So each feature is assigned a condition based on how many attributes have passed or failed. And again, a rationale is provided and a confidence score is assigned based on the evidence that's been used. If the feature has not met its targets for a number of attributes, it's considered to be in adverse condition. In this part of the assessment, these adverse condition pressures and the drivers are highlighted, such as removal of the feature by fishing or abrasion of the feature from dredging or recreational pressures. There is a condition threats section which highlights activities that are not currently driving adverse condition, but could in the near future or by the time of the next assessment. There's also a section that describes what current management measures are in place, what they are and who they are managed by. And then finally, there's a remedies section that flags what measures could be taken or are proposed to be taken to try and bring the feature back into favourable condition and therefore meet the targets as laid out in the conservation advice. There may rarely be occasions where a full marine condition assessment cannot be undertaken due to lack of available evidence to support the decisions on whether the attribute targets have been met or not. In some of these cases, an assessment may still be required, for example, to fulfil reporting requirements. In these exceptional circumstances, a proxy condition assessment method can be carried out, which uses information on activities occurring at the site, along with the sensitivity of features to the pressures arising from those activities. The results will give the likely condition of the feature at the site. There are a number of caveats associated with proxy assessments, such as the lower confidence compared to the full assessment, and that the proxy results should not be used to draw site-level conclusions.
We publish our condition assessment on Designated Sites View. This is a public website that anyone can access. Once you have searched for the site you're after, you can click into Marine Condition, which takes you to the top screenshot. You can then go further into each stage of the assessment and view the features, the summary, the feature-wide attributes and the attributes, which you can see an example of in the bottom screenshot. Each stage gets more detailed the further down the hierarchy you go. So on to the Studland specific assessment. We will start with intertidal coarse sediment, which is a highly mobile sediment which includes coarse gravel and sand found between high and low tide, which supports a specialised variety of marine life such as algae, crustaceans and urchins. This was included as a feature of the MCZ, as under the Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009, MCZs must present all types of marine habitats. Intertidal coarse sediment is a broad-scale habitat listed for protection across many English MCZs such as Studland Bay to ensure ecological coherence. This feature is mainly located on the upper shore at South Beach, with a small patch present at the northern end of Middle Beach. This is the orange strip that you can see on the slide on the map. For many of the attributes for intertidal coarse sediment, no targeted monitoring has occurred since the baseline, so the baseline evidence was used, as well as anecdotal data and vulnerability assessments for this assessment, and as a result the confidence score was low. Not all attributes have been assessed, and the ones that have not are due to there not being enough evidence available, which is also captured within the assessment. So on to the intertidal coarse sediment assessment. You can see from the slide that we've categorised it as favourable condition. You can also see on the table which attributes we've assessed and if they're principal or secondary, as well as the associated target, whether the target has been met, and the confidence that we have in the assessment. All but one attribute, water quality contaminants, met the targets in our assessment, but we have low confidence in this assertion. There is no evidence that the feature's extent, distribution, species or sediment composition has changed beyond natural variation, nor that it has been affected by human activities or environmental change. It is not considered sensitive to most recreational activities occurring at the site, such as walking, swimming, and use of non-motorised watercraft. The feature is largely located on the upper shore at South Beach, which is not impacted by mooring or anchoring pressures. Sediment supply is maintained by natural cliff and coastal erosion, and the removal of coastal defences at Middle Beach is expected to sustain or increase sediment availability in line with the Shoreline Management Plan and conservation objectives. An updated survey should be prioritised to confirm its current extent, species composition and the sediment composition. It should be noted that this feature is sensitive to pressures such as habitat structure changes through the removal of substratum. Therefore, activities such as bait digging could impact this feature through the displacement and removal of intertidal substrate. Bait collection activity has been observed at a very light level of up to 4 instances a month by single individuals in the summer, and none have been observed using large forks or rakes. Therefore, it is considered that this activity being carried out at the current level is not likely to be exerting a significant pressure on the sediment composition of this feature at this time. The secondary attributes assessed are all to do with water quality. The outcomes and justifications for these will be the same for both intertidal coarse sediment and subtidal seagrass, so I'll go through them here but won't repeat myself in the seagrass section. The EA monitors contaminants, dissolved oxygen, nutrients and turbidity within the Dorset Hampshire Water Framework Directive water body. Studland Bay is within this water body, however the sampling site for this water body is about 7 kilometres away from the MCZ, which means in most cases site-specific data is not available. The Dorset Hampshire water body failed chemical status in 2019 due to measured assumed elevated levels of polybrominated diethyl ether and mercury and its compounds. These two chemicals are persistent, bioaccumulative and toxic substances which present risks to wildlife. Sampling has only occurred in a subset of water bodies in English water, but in all instances these chemicals were found at levels above the targets, and therefore in the absence of additional site-specific data at Studland, this classification has been applied here as well as extrapolated across all non-monitored water bodies. Dissolved oxygen was classified as high ecological status under the Water Framework Directive in both 2019 and 2022, indicating that the targets are being met. Dissolved inorganic nitrogen was classed as moderate status in 2016 and was improved to good in 2019. However, the sampling location is some distance away from Studland Bay, which means local conditions are not fully represented. Finer scale nutrient monitoring was undertaken during the 2022 Environment Agency Seagrass Survey at 5 locations within the seagrass bed. This classified Studland Bay as high status, although the report advised reducing this to good status with low confidence until further sampling is undertaken, particularly during the winter months. A minimum of 30 monthly samples is recommended to improve confidence and identify any potential impacts of nutrient loading upon the seagrass bed. Based on the available evidence, this attribute meets its restore target. For turbidity, in 2017, before designation, the EA classified phytoplankton as good status. In both 2019 and 2022, phytoplankton has been classified as high status, which is the best classification, which therefore meets the target. The assessment for intertidal coarse sediment relied a lot on expert judgment for most of the attributes due to direct and up-to-date evidence not being available, in which case baseline monitoring was used for quite a lot of the assessments. Vulnerability assessments had to be done using risk profiling of pressures at the site and the geography of where they occur and where the feature is. Direct evidence was only available for water quality attributes. The condition threats for this feature require further study. In the case of invasive and non-native species, not enough evidence is available to assess the attribute associated. Therefore, more evidence is required about how this pressure may affect the feature in the future, particularly the potential impacts of Pacific oyster, which is colonising intertidal habitats around the south coast. In the conservation advice, it is also not understood how shore-based activities and the spread and introduction of invasive non-native species will impact this feature. Habitat structure changes also have the potential to occur through activities such as bait digging. This does not currently occur at levels of concern, but it's recommended that it's monitored to avoid degradation of the feature. Management measures in place for this feature include the shoreline management plan, as well as all of the work done by the Studland Bay Marine Partnership, who have the best interests of the bay at heart and are continually working on improving the quality of the natural environment there. Potential remedies include an invasive species control program if it appears that Pacific oyster or any other species are having a negative impact on this feature in the future, as well as monitoring of bait digging activity. I've put the continued work of the Studland Bay Marine Partnership in this section as well, as they will continue to develop their work and focus their work depending on the needs within the bay and how they evolve. So now moving on to the next feature in the assessment, which is the seagrass beds. I expect a lot of you are already familiar with them, but just in case people aren't, then here's a quick intro into this feature. So at Studland, the seagrass beds are primarily found in the south and southwest corners of the bay, down to a depth of 4 metres. And the species of seagrass in Studland is Zostera marina, which is predominantly a subtidal species. The seagrass beds support a high diversity of fish, including pipefish, wrasse, ungulate ray, and provide a nursery area for commercially important fish and shellfish, such as black bream, pollock, cuttlefish, sole and plaice. Studland Bay is a known breeding location for the indigenous spiny or long-snouted seahorse, which uses the seagrass beds as habitat. In addition, the short-snouted seahorse and all 6 species of pipefish have been recorded here, including the rare Nilsson's pipefish. The beds are also an important food source for overwintering wildfowl such as Brent geese. Now moving on to the assessment of the seagrass beds. Again, from the table you can see which attributes we've assessed and if they're principal or secondary, as well as the associated target, whether the target has been met, and the confidence we have in the assessment. Seagrass overall has been categorised as unfavourable recovering condition due to failure to meet the targets for 3 principal attributes. This includes extent and distribution, rhizome structure and reproduction, and biomass, and 2 secondary attributes, water quality, contaminants, as with the intertidal coarse sediment, and non-native species and pathogens. We have medium confidence in this overall assertion. You can see from the table that I've got individual confidence scores for the attribute assessments, but yeah, it's been categorised as medium confidence overall for the entire assessment of seagrass. The first detailed survey of the seagrass at Studland, since it was proposed as an MCZ, was done in 2018 by the Environment Agency, and this established a baseline extent of almost 78 hectares. This is considered underrepresentative of the actual extent, as the full area of the bed was not surveyed. A repeat of this survey was conducted in 2022, which due to increased resource covered a wider area, whilst also encompassing the footprint of seagrass surveyed in 2018, which is the baseline. This allowed for a direct comparison between the baseline and the 2022 survey, and found that the extent of seagrass covered in the baseline had reduced by 8% in the 2022 survey, resulting in the extent attribute failing to meet the recover target. The surveys were conducted at the same time of year, making seasonal differences unlikely. The wider area surveyed in 2022 found the bed extended further to the east and to the north than previously mapped. Although the full extent of the bed was not surveyed, and is still therefore not known, due to the increased survey area in 2022, we now know that the total extent of the bed is 102 hectares. The area of the bed with more than 50% cover in 2022 was 15%, compared to 54% in 2018, so a significant decline in percentage cover has been observed, the causes of which have not been attributed. The subtidal survey planned by the EA for 2026 will provide an up-to-date evidence base of the extent and percentage cover of the bed and how it has changed in relation to the baseline and the 2022 data. Leaf length and shoot density, as per the Natural England 2021 survey, were measured to be in line with or greater than other beds in the southwest UK. However, as the rhizome mat has not recovered sufficiently to pass, and the percentage cover of the bed has declined since baseline monitoring, this resulted in the recover target not being met for the biomass attribute. Seagrass wasting disease was observed across sites monitored in the bay in 2021, The lowest infection scores were from the most northern sites and the highest from the most southern. The sensitivities associated with this pressure pose a risk to the seagrass bed and therefore have been captured in our assessment. Crepidula fornicata dominated sediments appear to have spread from being found only in the southeast part of the seagrass bed in 2018 to also being recorded in the northwest area of the bed in 2022. The difference between the surveys suggests that Crepidula fornicata is spreading within the bay, which may eventually have detrimental impacts upon the extent and distribution of subtidal sand, which is the substrate that supports the seagrass. Whilst the presence of invasive non-native species does not currently appear to be having an impact, anecdotally there does appear to be an increase in their presence, particularly Crepidula. Given there is no indication that the spread or impact of these non-native species has reduced, this attribute has failed to meet the reduced target. Work by Southampton University has highlighted that bare patch cover and spatial fragmentation of the rhizome mat varies within the bay, but there are clear signs of recovery of the seagrass bed, as a reduction was found in the size of 25 bare patches, mainly attributed to anchor scars, between 2021 and 2024, where bare sand is being infilled with new seagrass shoots as a result of decreased anchoring within the area of the voluntary no-anchor zone. The areas around the original 10 eco-moorings that were installed in 2021 have also shown signs of recovery, with new shoots growing in bare sand. This highlights progress towards targets for extent and distribution, biomass and rhizome structure being met. Significant progress has been made to reduce the pressures from anchoring, with compliance for the VNAS being around 88% over the sample period in 2024 and 2025. However, the pressure does still exist to some extent within the bay, so needed to be captured within this assessment. Further detail can be found in the VNAS reports produced by the Marine Management Organisation and the Studland Bay Marine Partnership annual reports for 2024 and 2025, which is now available, although it should be noted that the results from the 2025 report were not included in this assessment, as the assessment had been finalised for publication just as it was sent out, so it will be included in the next round. There are at least 16 private moorings known in the bay from marine licence applications, and the 2023 MMO mooring survey of a variety found there, and the MMO 2023 survey found that a variety of types were present within the bay. These are mainly traditional moorings with traditional sinker blocks, as well as some which had sea-light risers. These have varying effects on the seagrass bed, such as seagrass loss through circular scarring, where the mooring chain drags on the bottom of the seabed. In conclusion, the bed is showing clear signs of recovery, likely as a result of the decreased recreational anchoring in the bay. However, this recovery is not yet sufficient for the feature to be categorised in favourable condition. There has been 3 to 4 years of voluntary management measures implemented since the last round of monitoring by the Environment Agency and Natural England, which are alleviating recreational pressures within the bay, and a variety of monitoring by the Studland Bay Marine Partnership and University of Southampton that suggests recovery of this feature is occurring. However, it is just not yet sufficient to meet the recover targets identified in the conservation objectives, which Max was explaining in her earlier slides. The adverse condition reasons for seagrass are as follows: abrasion, disturbance of the substrate on the surface of the seabed caused by recreational anchoring and mooring, transition, elements and organometal contamination, sources unknown, as well as the introduction or spread of invasive non-native species, mainly from recreation, although I talk about this a bit more in a second. The threats to this feature include, the condition threats to this feature include signs of physical change to another sediment. This is already evident in the data available for the bay, although the causes for this are unknown. This refers to the Crepidula fornicata dominated sediments, which we were seeing in the 2022 Environment Agency survey. Penetration and disturbance to the seabed could be a threat through people unwilling to comply with the VNAS in the future. At the moment, people's willingness to comply has increased significantly, and observed compliance is around 88%, with attitudes towards the VNAS having improved significantly. So this seems unlikely for the foreseeable, but again needs to be noted in case anything changes in the future. Nutrient enrichment has the potential to impede recovery due to elevated levels of phosphorus and nitrogen due to freshwater discharge and agricultural runoff. Being located so close to Poole Harbour, is at risk as well because the harbour is hypernutrified throughout. The introduction of invasive non-native species is due to multiple drivers, not just recreation. This also includes fishing and commercial shipping as well. Being so close to Poole Harbour, fisheries and ports, as well as the high number of recreational vessels that use the bay and the surrounding coasts. This results in a much higher exposure and chances of introduction. Underwater noise changes can also have impacts on species that use the seagrass beds, and research is being done into the noise pollution at Studland using passive acoustic monitors. So in terms of management measures, at the moment we obviously have all of the work that's being done by the excellent Studland Bay Marine Partnership, as well as the SIFCA bottom-towed gear bylaw, which has just been formalised, and there is the SIFCA shore gathering bylaw as well. So remedies, the continued work of the Marine Partnership at Studland Bay will work to develop and focus their work as the needs within the bay evolve. There's also potentially some work around the private moorings to acknowledge that the presence of the private moorings is a complex one with no mechanism to apply any mandatory replacement, from damaging moorings to kind of more ecologically sensitive ones like the eco moorings that are owned and operated by the Marine Partnership. A survey was carried out by the Marine Management Organisation to gather more information on the location and construction of these private moorings in 2021. There is a planned Natural England survey this year which will look at the mooring scars around a couple of private moorings to assess the impact that they're having on the bed. Proactive engagement with the owners should be carried out to encourage the upgrades to full eco-mooring systems, or part if that's the route that people would prefer to go. And regular surveys should be carried out to check there has been no unconsented movement or change to the moorings, as well as assess any damage or recovery that is taking place. So moving on to the next feature, as Max beautifully highlighted earlier, we've got 4 features of Studland Bay MCZ. What you'll notice now is that we've only assessed 2 out of the 4 of them. So the 2 we've assessed, the intertidal coarse sediment and the seagrass beds, are published on Designated Sites View, where anyone can go in and look at the condition and the assessments that we've made in there. Unfortunately, we were not able to assess subtidal sand, so that just appears on the system as not assessed at the moment. And this is due to changes in the 2025 UK CMAP model, which is produced by JNCC, as the modelled extents of subtidal sand are significantly less than at designation. The model suggests the sediment type is instead subtidal mixed sediments, and as these are not a feature of the MCZ, it's causing issues with the extent and distribution assessments. This feature will be assessed when we receive clarification on how to proceed from JNCC and Natural England specialists, and the rest of the assessments, the rest of the attributes are ready to go. So yeah, this will be published as soon as we can. So moving on to our 4th and final feature to discuss, this is of course the spiny long-snouted seahorse, which we were also not able to assess during this condition assessment. This is primarily because the condition assessment methods were developed to assess habitats. Natural England have been gradually adding species assessments based on data availability and priority. We're currently not able to assess seahorses as no framework has been developed yet, but internally we have made this request for this to be developed by our specialists, and when this is complete and we've reviewed the available data, a condition assessment of this feature will be done. While we're on the subject of seahorses, just want to give a brief note about seahorse licensing. In England, you must apply to the Marine Management Organisation for a marine wildlife licence if you are diving or snorkelling and intending to do something likely to damage seagrass or disturb seahorses, which are often found in this habitat. You can apply individually for a seahorse wildlife licence from MMO free of charge, and this takes up to 13 weeks to process. We have plenty of time for questions, so if anyone has anything, then please ask away.
Okay, thank you very much. Wow, that was a lot of information. That was really interesting. Thank you, Jess, Ellie and Maxine. just wanted to slightly comment. Thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. There was, the lot of the data you talked about was from 2018 and 2022. We're really, I'm sure everybody listening and the partnership were really keen to hear the survey data from any surveys taking place this year. So we can see the effects or any impacts from the favourable impacts from the eco moorings. Okay, right. So if I can ask, oh, Ellie, there you are. I'm sorry, I've got so many screens up. Jess, Maxine, if you can put your cameras on and we shall start looking at the questions and answering questions. If you do have any questions that you'd like to ask, you can pop them in the chat if you haven't done so already. You can also put your hand up. So in the React bar at the bottom, you get an option to put your hand up, and I'll see your hand up in the participant list, and I'll invite you to unmute yourself and ask your question. We've had some questions already and some comments already from Nick. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for asking your question about scheduled monuments and wrecks within the bay already. Thank you, Maxine and Jess, for responding to those questions. And we've also got, Nick, another question from Nick about the Isla of Purbeck Aqua Club is beginning a survey of the two seagrass beds at Swanage and the North Pier. What information measurements should we collect to ensure that the data can be fed into studies, investigations being carried out, and who should be talking to locally for advice? And he made the interesting comment about the Cribidula fauna carta offshore that appears to be a decrease cover. Right, Maxine has made a comment already, a response to that. But Maxine, Ellie, did you want to say anything more about that to Nick?
No, only that we don't have much information on the Swanage beds at the moment, so that's a really welcome piece of monitoring if you guys can get out there and get a bit more information on. I think Max commented at the start of the presentation in her earlier slides about the monitoring, and that even though Natural England are responsible for the designations, we have so little budget to carry out all of the monitoring that we would like to. So we're really quite limited in what we can prioritise. So a bit more information about the beds at Swanage would be really great.
Lovely, thank you. And we've got a question from Louise Foster. Thank you, Louise. So Louise says, you mentioned several times about the low confidence regarding species composition and no surveys have been done since baseline. Are there any plans to carry out any intertidal and subtidal benthic surveys to increase the confidence?
At the moment, we don't have any surveys planned specifically to look at the species composition. We are hoping to get a Natural England dive team out for a survey in July that will focus on the kind of seagrass health indicators. So species presence and absence will be noted throughout that survey, but relative population abundances probably won't be able to be included in that simply because of the resource. So no, it's something that we have on our list currently, but yeah, again, just not right at the top of the priority list at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. David Brown. Thank you, David. So David asks, might the vulnerability to the seagrass wasting disease have a link with water quality? And could that explain why it's more prevalent in the south of the bay than further north?
Yes, potentially. I tried to do a bit of research into this previously, and I couldn't find loads of information on it, but that's been mentioned before. So again, something that we need to look into in the future, I think. There was also a correlation between the exposure, so whether exposure to wave action also has a impact on disease prevalence. I'm not sure, but yeah, certainly something for us to look further into. I don't know if Max can elaborate on that anymore.
No, I was just going to add that there's a local marine biologist, very knowledgeable, who has also expressed that same thought, David. And it's
yeah, it's reasonable to think that if something's already compromised in one way, then it's going to be more vulnerable to disease and the effects of that disease.
Okay, thank you, Maxine. Thank you, Ellie. Just to say that Maxine's camera is off because she's having camera issues. We were talking beforehand, weren't we? And we were getting flashing lights and all sorts. It was quite interesting. So we thought, I think you better turn your camera off. It might be safer. No, that's fun. Right. Okay. So we haven't got any more questions in the chat. Would anybody like to ask a question? Would anyone like to be brave and unmute themselves and ask a question to the team? Okay, let's have a look. No. Okay. I've got a question or two, actually, if that's okay. So, you mentioned, you talked about the subtidal sand and seahorses, and that they were a designation in the Marine Conservation Zone. Obviously we love seahorses, and we understand that subtidal sand is important, but what is the particular importance around these?
I'd managed to mute myself somehow there. So yeah, I think certainly the headlines of seagrass and seahorses get a lot of the attention, but the sediments and stuff within the bay is still important. So subtidal sand was designated due to its importance as a supporting habitat for seagrass beds, as well as a habitat standalone as it supports a variety of marine species. I mentioned earlier about the species that seagrass supports, and subtidal sand supports a very similar array of species with ungulate ray, pipefish, wrasses, as well as commercially important fish as well. The seahorses, so yeah, the long-snouted, otherwise known as spiny seahorse, those terms are used interchangeably. They were designated at Studland because they were very vulnerable to habitat loss, being residents of the seagrass beds. And yeah, this specifically referred to the kind of impacts and potential destruction from seagrass beds from human disturbance. As Studland was the only known breeding ground for the species at the time in the UK, it was really important that we afforded the protection as an MCZ because Studland Bay provides such high quality habitat due to the expanse of the seagrass beds there, and the seagrass provides shelter as well as breeding grounds. Seahorses are also protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act as well as the MCZ designations.
Lovely, thank you, Ellie. Also, I've just popped in the chat, if anyone's interested, a link to the condition assessment, the designated site views as well, so you can have a look directly yourselves there. David Brown, you've got your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask a question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki, and thanks, Ellie, for all that. Just a question following the subtidal sand stuff, actually. We're getting loads more easterlies at the moment, and I mean, I was actually down at Studland today. It's kind of the sort of sea you very rarely see at Studland, really kind of strong wave action. And I know when we had these storms just after Christmas, there was huge amount of kind of scour or some of that subtidal sand, and it brought onto the beach loads of bivalves and other mollusks and loads of otter shells and stuff, which are presumably, that's some of the species that the subtidal sands are really important for sporting. So you probably don't know the answer to this, but if we're going to get more and more easterlies, I imagine those features, all those features in the bay are going to potentially be more vulnerable, but particularly the ones that aren't anchored down by rhizomes of seagrass. Is there any, have you got any thoughts on that? And how does the so us as a Studland Bay Marine Partnership, what's our role, or how can we generally protect, or should we try and protect those subtidal sands more if the kind of changing weather patterns mean that they're going to be more vulnerable? That's a very long question.
That is a very good question. I think it's always really hard with natural causes, which can have such a big impact on the features. I'm not sure how that necessarily implicates for like the assessments that we do, but obviously natural change is something that we want to keep accounted for. It's not just human pressures that get kind of logged with us. What we can do about it, I'm not sure, but certainly something we need to keep an eye on. I don't know if there's any other sites that have had similar changes, but yeah, it would be worth.
Yeah, it's a question that's being posed all around the coast with climate change, storm conditions that, once 20 years ago we would have said were 1 in 100 year events, which are now becoming much more frequent. We have with University of Plymouth, we have a long-term reef recovery project that's been going on in Lyme Bay since 2008. And luckily it's annual survey. We get funding to do that annually. So it picks up, as well as human issues, it kind of picks up those stochastic events as well, and then the recovery from it. So we've managed to plot the recovery of some of those habitats that were damaged from the 2013-14 storms in Lyme Bay, and plot that recovery. So it's a good test case for similar habitats around the coast. But it also makes it more, brings into focus the importance of restoring these habitats that do contribute to things like wave attenuation and coastal erosion. And they're two services that seagrass provide. So, it makes it all the more important to be recovering, and salt marsh as well, to be recovering those habitats.
Yeah, thanks. I think from my point of view as well, it really illustrated, if you think those subtidal sands they're the boring bits of the bay with nothing in them, just see what happens when they get removed, and the sheer biomass of marine life that came onto the beach that was dependent on them. So it can be, definitely think it's something we should be thinking about. Thanks.
For sure.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Maxine and Ellie. Right, have we got any hands up? Any more questions? Let's do one more question. Okay. In that case, I shall ask my question. Obviously, we've talked about lots of data and monitoring over the last 6 to 10 years. Is there any planned monitoring going to happen within the bay on the back of this actual assessment?
Yeah, so we have had we've got 2 things coming up this year. So the Environment Agency, as part of their national seagrass monitoring programs, commit to including Studland Bay in that. So that's 4 yearly monitoring. We have spoken a lot about the Environment Agency data used for the baseline, which was the 2018 survey, and then there was a repeat of it done in 2022. So 2026 will be another one, repeating the same subtidal seagrass survey. Environment Agency have committed to surveying the entire extent of the bed at Studland. So at the moment, the figures that we have are still potentially conservative estimates. It might actually extend a bit further than we anticipate. It also might not, but the Environment Agency have committed to at least surveying the entire extent, which is really exciting. And that looks at percentage cover as well. That will also look at the sediment types within the bay. So where we were talking about the crepidula dominated sediments, the Environment Agency survey will also keep an eye out for that. They use drop-down video surveys and side scan sonar, I think. So they will, be a repeat of that in September, hopefully, or somewhere between June and September. Natural England also put in a bid as a joint project between Natural England, the Marine Management Organisation, and the Environment Agency. And this is a survey that will hopefully be done first week of July. And this is a replicate, or one part of it is similar to the Natural England 2021 dive survey, which looks at the seagrass health metrics, which includes shoot density, shoot count, percentage cover of seagrass, as well as macroalgae, epiphyte assessments, presence and absence of seagrass wasting disease, as well as other species present, such as invasive non-natives, but also those kind of key species that we look for that would inhabit the seagrass bed. So that will be 2 to 3 days of diving, and then there'll hopefully be 2 to 3 days of surveys looking at different moorings and looking at how moorings impact the seagrass bed and any recovery that's taken place. So this will look at 12 private moorings, which will be of a variety of kind of makeups and methods and makeups. And then we'll look at 6 of the original eco moorings that were installed, and then this will help us collect evidence on the benefits of pressure removal as well as the implementation of voluntary management measures.
Lovely.
Oh, I think Jess also had.
Oh.
Sorry, yeah, I think Jess had also mentioned something about something that the Marine Management Organisation were planning for this year.
Thanks, Ellie. Yeah. We've also got an MSc student coming to Studland to do a project on the perceptions of management. So there will be an online survey. There'll also be hopefully a face-to-face workshop in Studland. And we will also hope to do a session like this, but it will be interactive so that you can give your views of the management of Studland Bay. And that will be starting from sort of the beginning of July and running through the summer months. And then hopefully she'll be able to come back and present on this platform her findings later on in the year. So do look out for that. Thanks.
That's great. Lovely. Thank you so much, Ellie, Maxine and Jessica. Huge thank you for your time and your presentation this evening. Thank you to everybody that joined us here this evening, especially on a nice sunny Wednesday evening. I've just popped a slide up on the screen before we leave. It's got the Dorset Coast email address, so that's who I'm part of. Dorset Coast, you're a part of the partnership, so you can contact us on that email address if you have any questions. I've also got the Studland Bay Marine Partnership web URL link to the website, and there's also a QR code up on the screen which would take you to that. I also popped it in the chat at the beginning of the meeting. So the website is actually, if I'm able to share this, very early information, but we are actually in the process of developing a new website for the Studland Bay Marine Partnership. So it will be a lot more user friendly and focused to the partnership and the eco moorings. So hopefully we're hoping it will be ready to launch in time for the summer boating season. So watch this space. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. This video will be added to YouTube. I can't think of my words then. It'll be added to YouTube, and we'll also send an email out with a link for everybody that attended this evening in case you'd like to watch it again or share it with your friends or colleagues. So in that case, I shall end the meeting. I'll stop the recording. Let's stop the recording.